A very good evening to all our audiences from New Delhi. This is Sabyasachi Datta. I'm the Executive Director of the Asian Confluence. And a warm welcome to our audiences in Europe. Good afternoon, and all over the world in your respective time zones. On behalf of my own self, the Asian Confluence, and our collaborators, the Hans Seidel Foundation, represented here by the country head, my colleague and friend, Mr. Volker Flan. We are pleased to welcome you to this very, very interesting dialogue and conversation that we are going to have this afternoon. We joined in from New Delhi, India, on the topic "Who controls the water?" Perspectives from the European Union and South Asia. And we are joined here today to discuss on this topic by Ms. Camilla Christensen Rai, a member of the European EU Union delegation to India. She has vast experience in the field of policymaking, development in various capacities, and Dr. Medha Bish, senior assistant professor at the South Asian University based here in New Delhi. The South Asian University is the result actually of the SARC process and is a living example of regional cooperation in South Asia. So on that particular note, I'm extremely pleased and to welcome you both to this conversation. South Asia, from the Indus to the Ganga to the Brahmaputra, Meghna, which forms part of two contiguous basins, the Indus and the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna basins, and the other rivers in the southern part of India. The entire South Asia is interlaced by rivers. So is Europe. There are many rivers, the Rhine, the Danube, the Elbe, and so many. And rivers form the fundamentals of our culture, of the civilization, of the lifestyle, the folklore, the very heart of these two regions, as of course as other parts of the world. And in South Asia, these rivers, which have historically connected the whole region together by way of physical connectivity, trade, commerce, flow of ideas, cultures, which have naturally connected this region, are today, maybe it's a question to ask, are they really aiding the process of regional integration and regional collaboration in South Asia to the full extent? Is it a matter of control on who controls the water, which is forming the core of this discussion today? Can control be substituted with collaboration? Can control and collaborations work together? In Europe, great examples of collaborations around rivers, for example, around whether it's disaster management, urban development, all these sectors, connectivity, there are living examples. The Danube is a great example of how it connects, I think, as many as 10 countries, and in a great manner. So today's discussion on this topic is to find out sharings and learnings from the two regions on what are the possibilities of collaboration, cooperation amongst the various stakeholders. Is there a matter of control in the larger angle? How can rivers and waters become an enabler for regional cooperation in South Asia? In post-COVID times, how can it increase our trade, our regional prosperity, give us the means to further collaborate on narratives of health and connectivity and trade and commerce and economic development and people to people contacts within the region. And there are many learnings, I think, from the European Union. Also, I think we'll be very, very keen to explore being in part of this conversation, sharings from what are the opportunities and what are the challenges that both sides face. On that note, I'd like to again welcome all of you and to this conversation. And I'd now like to request my colleague, the country head of the Hans Seidel Foundation, India, with whom we are collaborating on this series of webinars. This is the third of a series. Mr. Plan, to give your opening remarks on this topic and take over the discussions.
Thank you, Sabyasachi, for this wonderful and very apt introduction. Welcome from my side as well. I have the honor tonight of representing not just Hans Seidel Foundation India, but also Hans Seidel Foundation Brussels. So as you mentioned, Sabyasachi, the topic of water is connected to so many various aspects of cultural aspects and trade aspects. And I'm looking forward to the experience sharing from both sides, South Asia and the European Union, because we can learn from both sides. We have climate change, for example. This is something, and I would like to start with this topic. Climate change doesn't stop on borders. And for common success again over climate change, it's crucial that the efforts against it in one country are mirrored by the other one, or at least that the neighbor is supporting it. Here, when we talk about climate change and the effects of global warming, water is something that springs to mind in South Asia and now Europe, the European Union as well, very quickly, because droughts and floods is something that in South Asia have been there due to the monsoon season since such a long time, whereas in Europe this is a relatively new phenomenon, but it is all the more strong. And so all over the world, we have national and international conflicts over water. They are increasing because the demand for irrigation, for navigation industries and drinking water, they are met with increased pollution and effects of global warming. So I would like to jump in with the title of our event tonight, Who Controls the Water? So if let's say if I'm representing a government of a country that has a river originating, and because of the effects of climate change, I feel I require all of the water of this river. I need it for my industries. I need it for my irrigation. I need to use drinking water for cattle and for my population. Why should I share any drop of this water with my neighbor? So we're getting into the question now of who controls the water, who controls a river in this example, and what would be the advantage that I should look after if I were to share the water. I'm throwing this question out to both of you, Ms. Rai and Professor Bish. Who would like to answer this question first? Who would like to start with her thoughts?
You would like to go, Ms. Christensen?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to join today. I think I will start with you mentioned one of the things you mentioned is climate change. So I think I will start with the EU Green Deal, which is from December 2019. And it aims towards the climate neutrality by 2050. It is concerning climate, and it's also concerning environment. So it is have a focus on the climate and the energy. It's also have a focus on the water, on the air, and on the soil. and are focusing on are aiming towards zero pollution. This is mentioned in as one of the topics in the action plan. So the EU Green Deal contains the action plan. It also contains a mechanism on you can say how to reach the targets in the action plan. So I think that is, you can say, an important framework to take into account when we talk about climate, and also in this regard, water. And another thing maybe to put in here is to take the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It is a sustainable development goals with I would say common understanding to work towards reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the Sustainable Development Goals is about the water sector. And in such a framework, it creates that various parties or various countries are looking towards the same direction. And you can say there are 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, and number 17 is about partnerships. And I think this is a really important goal as well, because when you look into the water sector or any other sectors like that, you need to work in a partnership. And that also is the case of the water sector. If you want to take care of the elements of the UN SDG 6, it is about protecting and restoring water and ecosystems, wetlands, rivers, lakes. It's also about providing access to clean drinking water. And since water is such a thing that is basically flowing across the borders, I think it gives a good framework of working together in order to ensure there's a clean drinking water, there's reducing pollution of water, and reducing wastewater, and so on. And from the EU, we have EU-India strategic partnership, and we have a summit in July this year between EU and India. And one of the frameworks we have is EU-India water partnership. And of course, we can come back to that later on. But just to give some input on some of the topics which you started out with. Of course, I think also important to take this in the context of the government of India's missions or programs. And here I'm thinking about the Jal Jeevan mission, which is about ensuring piped drinking water for 2024. And also about the government of India's smart city mission, which is having various aspects of a smart city, but one of them is to have enough water supply for the citizens of the smart cities, of the cities of India.
Now, this actually does sound really great, but was it also easy to convince all members of the European Union to commit to this Green Deal?
What I would say is that, as always, when you have a topic you wish to work around, it can be in any negotiation. It can be among two parties. It can be about among multiple parties. You will have a different interest coming into the picture, and I think the fact that you reach a common understanding is important to take into account. Well knowing that you have, as always, in such situation, various parties and various interests, and those have to kind of you can say fall into place in order to agree on a topic like this?
Thanks. Professor Bish, this idea of having all neighbors coming together and signing a deal where they have to commit to certain goals, which cost money, cost maybe economic progress, sounds too good to be true for the South Asia, right? How is it? How would that such a model be possible in South Asia, or maybe there is already, or there is potential for one?
Thank you for that question. I mean, as you rightly point out, and this has always been my position too, that to start with negotiations, seem to be a very innocent idea in South Asia, primarily because of the intertwining of, I would say, the internal and the external elements, politics. So, the best way to perhaps start in South Asia, and we've had, in fact, a number of water agreements, but of course, they need to be revisited, they need to be upgraded. But I think to start with, you need a dialogue. And that's what my position has always been, that you need a dialogic understanding before you really start with negotiations. And I know that, some would consider that dialogues are an inbuilt part of negotiations, primarily when you're talking about integrative bargaining or joint problem solving. But I think in South Asia, from a geologic point of view, it's very important to understand what is really meant by water. Does water really mean that liquid or the H2O, which is really flowing in the river, or it is really the ecosystem, the entire ecosystem, which would in fact include the sediment, the wetlands, the biodiversity. And I think this holistic or integrated understanding of water becomes significantly important when we are actually thinking about water negotiations or water diplomacy. But interestingly, I mean, I would like to perhaps go back to your question and of who controls water. And that, in fact, animated my imagination quite a bit, being located in South Asia. And I would say that, the answer to this question, from a South Asian lens, would perhaps, be built on the lens from which you are actually looking at this question. And I would say that there are three lenses, from which you could actually address this question. The first to my mind would be a legal lens. And, when I'm talking about the legal lens, I'm primarily talking about the global water normative framework, which is there. And of course, the United Nations Water Convention, is a part of it. And two essential primary principles, which talk about, controlling water vis-a-vis the other, is really the equitable and reasonable utilization of water. And the second is the obligation not to cause harm to others. And, from this legal perspective, when you look at South Asia, of course, none of the South Asian countries have in fact ratified the treaty. And I think it was only Bangladesh and Nepal which favored which favored the treaty. There were favorable votes to the treaty, but apart from that, none of the countries ratified it. And when you look at this whole issue of who controls the water from the legal perspective, definitely it falls flat on the ground. But having said that, I'll say that all these countries have a very different contextual understanding of water, in South Asia, and they have their own, I would say, bilateral arrangements when it really comes to looking at the water issues, or referring back to your original question of who controls the water. I would say that, now when you look at this question from a political lens, then the question seems interesting to me. And then perhaps I would like to really take you back to this hydro hegemony framework, which in fact, has been offered by the London, by a group of scholars who were working on this particular issue area in the London School of Economics, the King's College, the London Water Research Group. And what they offered was that they in fact centered on power as really the key fundamental instrument in shaping cooperation between actors. And what they argued that the relationship between state behavior and water actually goes back to power asymmetry, between actors, and also to how they really are located in a particular region. What is the geographical region, geographical location of these states? So there is a very deterministic sort of an understanding when it really comes to, again, this question of who controls the water, because obviously it's the player which is, or the actor which is more powerful, both in economic terms or in military terms, or geographically is more privileged in terms of being an upper riparian, would definitely control water. Now, having said that, I would say that there is another perspective or another lens to really look at this issue again. And I would say that would really be the sociological lens. And in the sociological lens, what we are essentially doing is that we are actually looking inside the state. And so when we are looking inside the state, the question for us as to, who controls the water, who controls water distribution, then needs to be seen, I would say, from the frames of gender, from the frames of class, from the frames of caste, religion, ethnicity, etc. Because in South Asia, interestingly, water rights are proxy to land rights. I would say these set of responses as to who controls the water when it comes to, the South Asian perspective, seems to offer a very complex picture. And I would say it's the second and the third category which would really appeal to the South Asian case. Yes, I mean, so that's the long answer to that very complex question. But I guess it's the second point on the political lens, and the third point on the sociological lens becomes very important when you're actually trying to address the key question of who controls the water.
These are many interesting points, out of which it's difficult to now focus on just one, because we have already caught a glimpse of how vast the area of hydrodiplomacy is. Still, allow me to pick out one point here, the point of power asymmetry. So this is actually quite fascinating. In the European Union, we can safely say that the power distance between countries is not as big as it is in South Asia. But let's take the example of India. We have a huge power symmetry in economic terms between India and smaller neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. But when you look at water, and you mentioned the word water hegemony, would you say that, for example, that Bhutan has, I think, with the exception of Tibet, the greatest freshwater resources in South Asia? Doesn't Bhutan, isn't that now a lever for Bhutan to counter this power asymmetry by using water and water diplomacy?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I think, and that's the reason I would in fact go back to that earlier question where I said that dialogue needs to be privileged more than negotiations. Because when it really comes to water diplomacy, I think understanding is very important. And primarily, one of the main reasons as to why India and Bhutan is a successful case study in India, in South Asia, and that I would say is a South Asian exception, is because of the trust which is there between Bhutan and India. I mean, on the contrary, if you take the case of Nepal, India has not really had the same kind of an arrangement with Nepal, and it's really been a rough arrangement over a period of time where Nepal has had many issues regarding the operation and the maintenance of canals. And what essentially happens that in these discourses where water is supposed to be a function of cooperation, it actually becomes a very contentious issue because it is then associated with the issue of sovereignty. It is associated with the own riparian fears. Geographical location definitely matters, but I think one antidote to this geographical location is the trust between the countries. And I think, Bhutan-India case is really, an exception in that context because of the kind of trust which both the countries have shared, because of the goodwill that both the countries have shared, I think, post-1950s.
Trust is also something that, safe to say, has been established in the European Union over the past 70 years. Now, here in South Asia, the European Union is being seen as the epitome of multilateralism. We have in the European Union, we can see that there are conventions and agreements among not just 2 countries, but up to 10 countries when it comes to water diplomacy. And it's very difficult to understand if you come from a country where bilateralism is defining geopolitics, how such a convention could work. So, Ms. Christensen-Rey, could you explain a little bit the Danube Convention, Rhine Convention, or to be more specific, how these were implemented in the wider framework of the European Union?
Right. Okay. Thank you. So what you can say is that we have the Donau River, which is basically crossing 10 countries. It goes from Germany, and then it goes down through Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova. It comes to Ukraine, and it goes into the Black Sea. It is 2,850 kilometers. And then there's the Rhine River. It is the second longest river. It goes through three countries, Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands, and it goes into the North Sea. So there has been a setup on you can say how do the countries then work together in order to protect the rivers. So, for example, if you take the Rhine River, there was in 1999 a convention to protect the Rhine River, and in 1998 there was a convention to protect the Donau River, and so these 2 conventions are basically, you can say, bringing the countries together in order to conserve the water, the surface water, the groundwater, preventing this pollution. It also has a sustainable development, you can say, item or focus. So the ecosystem as well. So I think that one thing is important when you look at such cooperations between whether it is 10 countries, it is 3 countries, and if we look at the EU-India Water Partnership in India, there's a focus on the Tapi River basin that includes Gujarat, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh. So in a way, you can see some kind of similarities here. There's a need to work together. There's been a common goal to work together. And how do you do this then? I think the important thing is to look at the institutional setup. To look at, to have a clear institutional setup. Who are the parties in such corporations? It's the national government, it's the state government, it is the cities, it is the countries, and you actually have a formalized committee and also purpose of this work. I think that is that needs to be very much in place in order to also achieve what wants to do in such corporations. And I would also think that you can bring it down to a city level. You can bring it down to a city level in India, because if you wish to work on a river, you wish to rejuvenate a river, you wish to improve the water quality, you wish to maybe bring in an environment around the river which facilitates that it's a greenery. You need to bring various stakeholders together as well in the city context. So It can be municipal corporation, it can be the water resource department, it can be other departments which has a task in relation to the river. So whether you look at the city scale or you look at the what you can say country scale, where you have a number of countries working together, you will always have to find a common ground, and it's important that you can bring the stakeholders together, the right stakeholders together, and that they are able to, I mean, in that way, to work on the task on first of all ensuring the water quality, sufficient water, the environment around the water. And then you could bring this into the city context in another way as well, which is, I think, one of the items you mentioned in the introduction was also what you see in some cities, the flooding of the city. And here there's maybe two items to look at. One is, I mean, increased rainfall, right? But the other thing is also what happened to the lakes or the water areas in a particular city. If you look at Hyderabad, you could read that in the newspapers recently. It experienced a lot of flooding. But what it also seems from some of the news items is that there's basically a loss of lakes, or loss of water bodies, or lakes, or loss of space for where the water can flow into, and therefore it may just flood your street instead.
So you described the how water governance and cooperation can work on the city level, in India, state level, also in India with the example that was implemented by the EU-India Water Partnership, and on the country level. And you said that the Danube Convention brought the countries together. This is especially interesting since I was hinting in my introduction at the fact that water can be quite divisive. And we do see that in South Asia, or more specifically here in India, we can see how river water sharing can divide states, and especially when it becomes a very politicized topic. So when you say that the Danube Convention brought the countries together, are you saying that a water treaty or hydrodiplomacy is a way to create a sustainable peace among neighboring countries?
Well, I think what I will say is that if you also look at the EU Water Framework Directive, I mean, in working in the from a directive point of view, from a point of view where you have a common goal and you have a set of countries where you then have a process working towards some of the similar objectives, you can say, or aims, but that you can work with having frameworks or directives where you kind of give a common platform. And of course, it when you do framework or directives or legislation, or it also means that there is an implementation part, you can say, of course. So there's two things to it. You reach a framework and legislation, and then you also, of course, need to ensure the implementation of the same. I think basically when you bring various parties into the same room, and when you look at a topic like water, or it could be air as well, it is a common need and it is across borders. I mean, or across states, or the district in a state, or across cities, you can say. You have to find a way to work together and in order to achieve the goals of also ensuring the drinking water, ensuring the water quality, and minimizing the wastewater. And of course, I said implementation is important, but it is, because one thing is to have the legislation, or the plans, or the master plans, and the other thing is that is it actually happening on ground, you can say.
Mm-hmm. Right. I would like to now get back to the EU-India water partnership. And I know, Ms. Christensen and I, you are working on this almost every day, but allow me to ask this question to Professor Bish. The EU-India water partnership, we have now seen there is a multinational water governance structure in place in the European Union, and it seems to be working well. Do you think that the EU-India water partnership could help South Asia, or India for that matter, also to implement similar water governance structures among states, or maybe even between India and other countries?
Mm-hmm. Before sort of addressing that question, I think, there are two ways. There are two ways, I would say, in which I would like to perhaps respond to this question. And because these two ways come very categorically to my mind. The first is, is on the application. It's in the application of the EU model, to India and South Asia. And I think here I would like to highlight this question, that this would primarily depend on the nature of federalism in the coming years. What is really the relationship between center and the states? So if the Indian democracy or South Asian democracies are really moving on to cooperative federalism, where there is a trust between center and states, then definitely I would say there is a high potential for this partnership in the region. If there is still, I would say, some diplomatic rhetoric on this, but at the same time, the political culture doesn't really change, essentially, because we know that we are getting here two regions, EU and South Asia, which have two, very different political cultures. Then I would say that it would be business as usual, because when I was in fact looking at this report on the cleaning of the Ganga, one of the primary arguments that really came in from the EU side was that a behavioral change is very necessary. It's just been 5 years, and I think to clean the Danube itself, it almost took around 30 years. So when you're actually hitting at such a, I would say, ambitious partnership, it would actually need a change in political culture, change in behavior at multiple levels, change in attitudes. And then I would say that, you can in fact reach its full potential. Otherwise, it would just be business as usual. And on the other hand, if we see in the coming years, and that's critical, I think, at this juncture when you're asking me this question, in the coming years, if India and South Asian countries move towards competitive federalism, in the sense where the trust between the states and the center, of the provinces and the federal government is really low, there is a high trust deficit, then I think this partnership is not going to work, because I think you need that trust between the center and the states. So this is really, I would say, responding to the application bit of it. But maybe, because I am a student of international relations, I'm a student of geopolitics. When I in fact looked at the promise of the India-EU partnership and what it really holds for the region, I in fact thought of three important points. And the first point which came to my mind is where both EU and India share, in fact, a special interest, or an overlapping interest, could actually come from the developmental lens. It could be the developmental imperative. And I think, when you're talking about the developmental imperative in the EU-India relationship, I mean, I'm going back to the 1992 Rio conference when the whole debate or the discourse on water and sustainable development was foregrounded. And if you really look at this partnership, I think picking up from 1994 to 2020, the partnership has essentially matured, and we have a strategic partnership. And I would say that, two essential pillars, as Mr. Stevens was also raising this point, one was the MDG, but the second now could be the SDG. And if you again think of the India-EU partnership, you feel that, where India is in fact giving an opportunity to EU to actually, help localize certain sustainable development goals. So India gets an opportunity to localize the certain sustainable development goals. There are 17 goals out there. I guess EU also benefits because EU can then operationalize some of these, normative ideas, which I think is a very intrinsic part of its identity. And this is where I would say, is the developmental payoff, of this partnership. The second payoff, I would say, is the strategic payoff. And I mean, this is, I would say, very much linked to the developmental payoff, because when the EU water industries say they come to India, or the business interests come to India, definitely I think it is really an opportunity for them, because India is a big market. And I think given that water sector is really emerging as a major issue, India has so many MOUs with other countries. I think strategically it would really pay off in very well in the long term to EU water industry. And meanwhile, I think on the Indian side, if one was to really look at it again as a foreign policy analyst, what is there in this EU partnership, I think it will do good to India, to in fact develop and build ties with the EU. Because right now what we see, unfortunately, is that our current policy debate, or the strategic debate, is really centered around a triad, India, China, and US, where India happens to just be a swing power. And I guess that, if both the countries really have a grand strategic vision, if they really can take this partnership forward, then I think, strategically it would be nice for India, in the coming years. And I would in fact go to this third point now, which again I feel is very important, because I feel there is another payoff to this whole partnership, which is the democratic payoff. And why I'm saying the democratic payoff, because if you look again at India, India is a young democracy. And again, when I look at the India-EU partnership, I think it's very comprehensive. It's comprehensive because it's really talking about the partnership between the state. It's talking about the partnership between the business sector. It is actually talking about the partnership, with, I would say, the civil society. And I think that's the approach you need when you're talking about water resource management. And I think in the long term, this is also going to be good for the health of the Indian democracy. So, I do see a convergence of sorts. At a conceptual level, I really do see these three payoffs. But yes, at the application level, at the applied level, I feel it's the nature of federalism in India and South Asia, which definitely is going to shape, how city partnerships, or I would say city diplomacy, or para-diplomacy, as it's called in diplomatic jargon, would play off in the coming years.
Thank you. May I invite all our visitors, watchers on YouTube and Facebook also to ask questions in the comments. We might get a chance to answer them later, and would display them also here. Ms. Christensen, the picture that Professor Bish has painted right now of the EU-India water partnership sounds quite positive, quite optimistic. Do you agree with her statement? I mean, that there's a democratic payoff, that it's a mutual benefiting partnership, but that there's also a quite strong difference in the political setup between the European Union and in India, so that it probably would be limited, the scope of the benefits?
But I think what I will say, first of all, it is a partnership. So partnership is, of course, among two parties, and if you have when you have a partnership, it is a good setup for a cooperation where you have mutual benefits. And I think if we look at such partnership, it can be water partnership, it can be other partnerships on urbanization, or I mean, there will always be a defined set of goals or a defined set of actions which the two parties or the parties has agreed upon and wish to work together around. This is also the case for the EU-India partnership. It is going back to 2015, and you can say maybe in the last 3 years it has different priority areas which it has worked around, and one of them is the river basins management, and this is where I also mentioned the Tapi River at one point in the beginning, the Tapi River. So I think you really have to look into the priority areas, the areas of the partnership focusing on, and then in a partnership you also have the opportunity to revisit what you are doing, and or as in any other institutional setup as such, and revisit what task is progressing well, what task should we revisit, and what tasks are really where you can contribute to some degree, but also you can say external parties outside such partnership also has a role to play.
Right. You were giving the example of the Tapi River right now. Could you give a concrete example where on the Indian side there has already been a success of concrete implementation happening through the EU-India Water Partnership, and or the other way around? Is there something that the European Union has been learning? I mentioned, for example, in the beginning, droughts and floods. Coming from Europe myself, I would be interested in knowing if there was something we could learn from South Asia that might help us with fighting droughts and preventing floods in the future.
Okay. First to the first question, I think one very good outcome of the EU-India water partnership is that you have the work of the Tapi River basin. You are working on a management plan, Tapi River basin, and it is a committee which includes the Jal Shakti, the water ministry. It includes the 3 states which I mentioned, the relevant parties from these 3 states. So that I think is a very good setup, a very good achievement, and very good cooperation between the various parties here. And of course, I should say also that it is a so that's one thing. Then you said about the flooding and experiences in Europe, and what could we also learn? What could Europe learn from India? And I think one of the things when you look at cities in India, or you particularly look at, for example, Rajasthan or Gujarat, you have the very impressive water system, which you have with the water, what you call step wells, at the step wells basically. So step wells is a system which has been, you will see many places in Rajasthan, or you will see in Gujarat, and it's a place where the water will kind of collect, and such kind of structures I think is very impressive, and it is structures to take in to the management of the water in the cities, in the Indian cities, and to some extent similarly in a European city. And but in the European cities, you will maybe also see some examples on how is it that you collect this water from a heavy rainfall. How do you collect it in the squares of the? It is becoming a square, but it's also a place to collect the water, water plaza or things like that. So I think for sure that is a good inspiration and learning from the India side towards EU, you can say.
Nice. Professor Bish, Ms. Christensen and I has just mentioned that there needs to be a certain cooperation, and Jal Shakti is also a part of cooperation, is involved in many of the Indian, or probably all of the Indian water missions, even on state level. In fact, I know that they also work together with the civil society, which is a relatively new development. And I found that quite fascinating personally. What do you think in hydrodiplomacy or water governance that is of transboundary nature, the role of actors of civil society can play, or civil society organizations? Since when we talk about water diplomacy, we think of agreements between nations, but what is the role of civil society organizations?
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with it, because civil society organizations do in fact play a very important role. And I say this for one specific reason, okay? The first is that, if you look at the narrative of water diplomacy in South Asia, I would say that, excuse me for that, but, I'm just trying to unravel the layers and layers in this discourse. But when you look at the narrative of water discourse in India, I would say there are two narratives here. One is the meta narrative and the other is the micro narrative. So when you are actually looking at talking about water diplomacy, I mean, my question to someone would be that, which narrative are you talking about? So if it's the meta narrative, then obviously we're talking about state to state diplomacy. And there we see that there are set kinds of treaties, negotiations, and some of the treaties need to be upgraded. But yes, we fairly done, I would say, not very poorly, when it really comes to a state based diplomacy. But when you really look at and you want to critique this meta narrative, you see that, this meta narrative does not really speak to some of these lived realities of the people on the ground. And the gap between the micro narrative and the meta narrative is really huge. So, and it's here I would say that the civil society really steps in, because the civil society can really help in upscaling some of these local issues. Say, I would say from a subnational or the local level to the bilateral level. So that is one, I think civil society can definitely play a role, a very productive role. And how it can play that productive role is towards bridging this meta-narrative and this micro-narrative, because the lived problems, the experiential issues which people really face on the ground are definitely very different when, you look at these treaties and, well, they are being negotiated, but what implications and consequences these treaties really have on the lives of the riparian communities is one set of question. The second thing, which perhaps I would again want to critically engage with this whole idea of civil society, is that, when we're talking about civil society, I wouldn't just restrict civil society to formal organizations like NGOs or INGOs. And to my knowledge, of course, there are a plethora of organizations here, but also to these informal collectives, these informal groups which are there. And I say this because, if you look at the partnerships, which in fact this region has witnessed, the informal groups or these informal collectives, in fact, play a very fundamental role in terms of, bridging differences between actors. But more to that, I would say that when you're looking at the civil society, if your understanding of the civil society is a post-colonial notion of the civil society, because again, when we're talking about South Asia, it's a complex geostrategic space. It's a post-colonial geostrategic space, and therefore, if the civil society also happens to be just an extension of the post-colonial understanding, of the state, then I don't think so it will do any good, because the reference point of the civil society then really would be the nation state. So, definitely civil society can play, but then can civil society, in the way it really thinks about water issues, really think beyond the state? And it's here that, in my own work, I've in fact really talked about networked governance, rather than state-to-state diplomacy, because I think when you're really talking about these multiplicity of factors and you're talking about a multi-level governance, a networked approach to water diplomacy becomes essentially very important. And when I'm talking about the networked approach to water governance, the key players in my mind are, of course, the international non-governmental organizations, the formal NGOs, the informal collectives who actually work with the state in terms of making a difference down at the ground. And I would say just a quick example of this, which in fact I have written about also, is really the Saralbanga case, between India, Bhutan, and the Pani Sansad, I guess, along the Mahakali River between India and Nepal. And, I see this because, both of them have been phenomenal, but at the same time, one of the limitations, I would say, of these approaches is the sustainability of it. And there is where I feel that it is required by the civil society and by these non-state actors to really engage with the state, so that once the donors leave, once the NGOs step aside, at least the community can actually sustain some of these programs at the grassroots level. So, some fundamental points when we're trying to look at civil society conceptually, but yes, I think this becomes important when we're talking about water diplomacy and civil society in South Asia.
I'd just like to jump in now and ask a question to both of you. One thing that's coming out from both your comments is that the role of an educated public bottom up is very important. Even if you take the case of a competitive federalism case, where a state has to prove that it's doing something as opposed to another state, within the same nation, even then the state needs the cooperation of the public. And therefore, in any scheme of water governance, we all know that the role of civil society actor or informal groups, as you, Dr. Bish, alluded to, or we call them the third space in Asian confluence. It's very important, where these informal groups work together with government, with industry, with the small and micro businesses. And I have two questions to you both, actually, and you can first go ahead, Dr. Bish, and then Mr. Raik, and you can also answer them. Is that how do we educate our public more on the value of our water resources, and how is it part of the curriculum in our education system? Do we really understand? You alluded to step wells in India. I mean, how many of us really understand the value of these step wells? You know that the Jal Shakti Ministry has been making a big effort now to revive the traditional methods of water storage, underground water table conservation, such as the deep wells and all of those things, the traditional methods. But as in our education, at least in South Asia, I'm not aware of much effort being done on that regard to create the kind of sensitivity which is the need of the hour, whether it's localizing the SDGs or whatever else. And part of this, I may also add that a part of the intent of this conversation is also to create awareness, and about this. So maybe can there be possibilities of learnings between EU and India on best practices, models one can follow. Getting inspired, like the squares in Europe, which collect water. Can our urban planning be, inspired by that? And it's not all in the government. So I think we need civil society and private and small industry and industry actors to get in, and to do that kind of knowledge transfer, or we need some institutional approach to how that knowledge sharing can happen. Maybe some civil societies can engage across the two regions to do that education, of the bottom up. So your comments and the way forward on that. To you first, Dr. Bish, and then Ms. Rai.
So, when you're talking about this whole notion of educating the public, I think, that's very important, because I would say maybe frame it alternatively as raising the consciousness towards what water means. And I think that's very important, particularly in a post-colonial context like South Asia, because many of our water policies today are actually influenced by the colonial legacy. And I remember that, going back to one conference which I had convened some time back, someone said that water management is nothing but dams management in India. So we're not actually managing water. What we're doing is that we're just managing dams. And I think that's important, speaks a lot. But so educating the public, or relearning, and I think that wonderful point which was really brought on the step wells was very interesting, because I myself, in fact, took up this whole theme, and we really worked around this notion of water architectures and hydrodiplomacy. And when we're really looking at this whole concept of water architectures, we were in fact looking at these step wells, because these step wells were so, I think they are, the way they are designed, so harmoniously designed in terms of, taking care of the groundwater aquifers, that not only, say, in big cities like Gujarat or in Delhi, you do see, an example of this phenomenal architecture. But I would say that if you even go to the villages, there, of course, they're not called step wells, but they would be called nalas. And especially in the hills and all, how people, in fact, really tried to tap this groundwater. So I would say, when it really comes to traditional methods, India is very rich. And I think there is an effort in Indian policy thinking now to really go back. But, and I remember I had, in fact, taken my students to the step well in Delhi, and we did see, that, they are not really maintained, as Sabisati pointed out. So I would say, education, or the psychological aspects of water diplomacy, or the psychological aspects related to water, become very, very important. And one way, in fact, I've just finished writing a paper, and we've submitted it to a journal, and this is in collaboration with a professor in Bangladesh, where we've really talked about culture being a fluid interlocutor in terms of looking at water diplomacy. And the reason why we brought the culture into this debate, because, when you look at this whole debate on culture and water diplomacy, culture is primarily looked in a very instrumental sense. I think it's kind of boxed in as a soft policy package. But I think when you're actually talking about culture, and through culture, through dramatic performances, if you are actually communicating the meaning of water, to communities, the kind of relational impact it will have on groups will be very different. And I would say that culture becomes that fluid interlocutor, because it really tries to then, I would say, really reframe that understanding of water as not just being understood as a source, for exploitation, but really as a resource. And I think, given the diversity, cultural diversity in South Asia, I think culture can be a very good medium where you can, in fact, educate people, because then it's not really a seminar room, but you're actually going and, through dramatic performances, you are in fact really conveying what you really have in mind. So when it really comes to educating in public Gabri, definitely, it's really about changing your mindsets, and changing mindsets become very important. I mean, we all know about Carl Jung and his whole concept of collective unconscious, that, how we really consciously need to change how we think, that habit, or what Budo calls that habitus. The old habits die hard. And I think you want our old habits to die hard, we really need to consciously think about looking at water and understanding water in a different way. And I thought that culture could really be a very effective fluid medium in terms of doing that. So that's my question to my response to your question.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Rai, would you like to comment on this, and also what Dr. Bish just said? And we are particularly interested to learn from you a little bit about what could be shared as best practices from Europe in our education, so that it becomes sort of a model to aspire to or emulate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think there's maybe two, three things. Just wanted to respond. I mean, I think one thing is, you can say, is something you can call connect to the past. I was in a quite interesting conference, and here in Delhi some time back, and one of the sessions was on connecting to the past. This was in terms of building and housing and so on. So that is in a different field, but still the idea is that, did we forget something we actually knew in the past, and we do not use it anymore? And if we kind of remember it, then it could be relevant for today. And that was in case of, for example, a certain type of building materials, which is very relevant for today as well. And it is also relevant in the Indian context, because if you look at the way you build the houses, and you wish to keep maybe the heat out of the houses, and so you look at for a certain type of materials, or maybe you look for some materials which has a certain kind of sustainability. So what I'm just saying here in the water and the step wells, that we may want to connect to the past and see, is there something we forgot, and which we can actually utilize again now, that knowledge. And then we need to ask the persons who know this. It may not be us which know it. We need to ask the persons who are, it can be in the city, it can be in the rural area, who know about the management of the water. Do you know about how what was the role of the step well? Because the step well, to my understanding, also had a social element to it. You went there, you met other persons, there's a social dimension to it. If you look at in the city, if you go back to the city context where the city area is expanding, so that means it's expanding from the city into what was before a rural area. It was maybe before it was a green area, there maybe was some lake there, and you will have people living and maybe doing agriculture, farming, but suddenly that lake or that lake bed disappeared and became a house or an urban area. So I think connecting to the persons who know these things, that's one thing. Another aspect would be that we have in the EU, we have a EU international, it's an urban cooperation program. So here you bring a European city and Indian city together. So that means you have officials from a European city, from the municipality, and the officials from the municipality or municipal corporation of the city in India. So this is a city-to-city diplomacy, you can say. Some of it also works on water and And this is, for example, when we talked about the water plaza and what is the water plaza. And here we have the city of Surat and Rotterdam, who works together on a water plaza. So just to say that I think in order to learn or reconnect, is that we need to work together, because there might be a knowledge out here already which we can utilize if we ask the persons who know actually. Yeah, I think that's maybe a few comments. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in every field, I think, as you both alluded to, in every field, whether it's urban development or there is a narrative which can be built to educate the public, and the dialogic approach. I'm really looking forward to your paper, and I remember the wonderful discussion we had on water and hydro diplomacy, Dr. Bish, and I think that's an idea that definitely deserves to be taken forward in practice, I think, across our shared boundaries in South Asia. And Volker, over to you. I think if you would like to ask something, we also have some questions from the public here, which I can show one question.
Right. When I look at this question, I get reminded of when we were talking about the civil society earlier. I might come back to that because that is probably quite interesting of what civil society in Europe is contributing to water diplomacy. But for now, I just realized that we haven't even spoken about the economic scope of water diplomacy in Europe and in South Asia. And coming back to the Green Deal that you, Ms. Rai, had mentioned in the beginning, the Green Deal also makes notion to a large extent of renewable energies. So we have this Energiewende in Germany, or it's actually now almost a global word. And I was wondering to what extent hydropower is playing a role, because hydropower, harnessing literally the power of a resource that is a transboundary nature, also needs cooperation between various countries. So what do you think is the potential of hydropower in the European Union when it's where all the countries need to come together? In South Asia, or especially in India, hydropower is, as Professor Bish mentioned earlier, is already a huge topic since a long time, where it's mostly on dam management. But Ms. Christensen, how's the situation in the European Union?
Well, now we are into the energy sector, so I would think a little bit cross sector-wise. So it's not my primarily work area, the energy sector, but the energy sector. I mean, when you talk about renewable energy, I would think that the wind sector is rather you can say large in that context. So it is, you can say, the wind farms on land, but also offshore wind. I would think that is of a, well, it is of great focus. Then the other focus is also on, you could say, biomass. Then there's I mean, now you're asking about the hydropower from an energy point of view, meaning that
more from a water diplomacy point of view, because this is something in India or in South Asia. Hydropower can be a source of friction and conflicts between countries. When you think of Nepal and India, for example, or when we think of the Indus Water Treaty between Pakistan and India, who gets to build the dams where that might lead to flooding if the water is harnessed somewhere else. I wonder if if such similar challenges are there in the European Union, and if not, how could these challenges be overcome?
I mean, to my mind, I do not have basically information on this this topic. When you look at the renewable energy sector in Europe, there's a large focus, as I said, on the wind sector, on the you can say biomass wind farms, offshore wind farms on land. You can be shifting generation of the wind farms from previous wind turbines and into some larger ones or newer ones, you can say. Yeah, it's really not really a topic I have worked too much with in terms of hydro.
Yeah, I think hydropower does simply not play a big role in the European Union, maybe also because we don't have this height differences that we see here in the Himalayas. But navigation is a topic, right? I grew up next to the River Rhine, and inland navigation was huge on the Rhine. I suppose it's also big in the Danube, whereas in South Asia, it seems to me that the potential for navigation has not been explored so far. I asked Professor Bish, so we have navigation we use the rivers in the European Union for inland navigation, and that has so making water diplomacy very important for economic development and economic cooperation. Is this something that is being debated in South Asia?
Yes, definitely it's being debated. In fact, inland water navigation is one of the issues that is up on the foreign policy agenda. But Volker, if I may here, when we are, and this has been one of, again, I've been thinking a lot about it, when you're actually using the word diplomacy, and we suffix or prefix the word diplomacy with a particular thing. So maybe hydropower diplomacy, or water navigation, inland water navigation diplomacy. Again, I'm speaking from the South Asian lens. Diplomacy to me is a relationship building activity. I mean, and that's very important to understand. I mean, so the way, if we really look at, the literature, there are three ways to define diplomacy. One is that diplomacy is an institution. The second is diplomacy is primarily a technique, and when we're talking about diplomacy as a technique, then we are essentially getting into negotiations and dialogue, etc., and primarily a conduit of communication. And the third is diplomacy as a method. And I think when it's trying to really understand what diplomacy is, then we are really trying to understand how countries really cooperate, how relationships are being cultivated or built, through that cooperation. So, and this, in fact, would in fact go to the notion of hydropower as well as to inland water navigation, because it's not that inland water navigation is a new concept to South Asia, not at all. I mean, if you really, way back to the 3rd century BC, if you look at Arthashastra, which is a classic text on state and statecraft, I mean, it's a detail. It is a manual which has details on the issues related to water navigation. So what I'm really trying to say is that rivers were actually used for navigation since a long time. But I guess when the Brits came, then of course they also had this whole idea of water navigation, and it was in fact debated at that point of time, or also to a great extent. And today, when we are talking about water navigation, I mean, look, in the South Asian perspective, I think South Asian rivers are very different from European rivers. And I would say, just maybe give you, 2 points there. First is that the South Asian rivers carry a lot of silt. There are a lot of sediments which the Himalayan rivers carry, which I believe is not really the case. And this siltation is important because what the siltation does really is that if you're also building dams or you're creating sort of infrastructure on rivers, the silt or the sediments really raise the bed of the river. And because of that, there are issues like floods, to which you were also referring to. And the second thing is that, South Asian rivers also by tendency shift over a period of time. And that again, we need to keep in mind. So, while in South Asia, that is the reason that while it's a welcome idea, because, it's definitely cheaper, it's very economic, as you rightly point out. But I think, the question or the devil would really lie in details as to where we are really building the ports, where are, which rivers or which stretches of the river we are really opening for navigation. I think those are very important points on which, a more comprehensive evaluation needs to be done, not only from an economic perspective, but also from, say, an ecological perspective, and also from a social perspective. So I think, these are issues which definitely relate to development, but at the same time, I think the consequences they really have for the political fabric of the South Asian countries is huge, and therefore they need to be dealt with some sensitivity as to what's really happening and what really translates to the ground. So that's what my response to this would be. It's not a simple question in terms of, definitely it's a good idea, but yeah, I mean, there are problems associated with it, and I'm sure that a lot much has been written on it since a very long time by people who really know the subject.
Right, now I fully understand. So I would like to now start looking a little bit into the future. I might make use of actually one question that just came in. It was specifically directed to Professor Bish by Anushek Chakraborty, but I will change this question a little, if I may. So the question was, how rooted or how deep is the problem of water mafia in water management and water control in your studies? So while this question is very localized, you could say, it hints at a terrible situation that we see, at least in India. I'm not aware of other South Asian countries, but the value of water has increased because it is being increasingly polluted, and because climate change and the increased demand makes it more scarce, so that water mafia, which is a real thing, has emerged in India. Now, I would like to know from both of you if you think this is a problem that could increase over the next years, and what other challenges you see coming up for water governance of transboundary nature in the specific regions. Since the question was directed to Professor Bish, I ask you first.
So absolutely, I mean, I totally agree with it. And when you look at water mafia, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is really the issue of sand mining, which is there. Though I've not really worked on it, but then the issue really interests me because, there is a mafia out there. And in fact, when you look at another kind of mafia, I think the water markets, again, there is a mafia which is emerging there. So, and interestingly, in fact, thank you for asking that question, because theoretically or conceptually, how it interests me is, again, I go back to my original point of a network understanding of water diplomacy. I think there is a very statist approach, the way we define water diplomacy, because the way, if you just analyze these non-state actors, for instance, the mafia per se, these are really network of actors, and they, the way they communicate, the way they connect, they in fact, align their interests, with not only the external environment, but with also, the way you can in fact understand water as a socio-ecological system. So I will say that, in terms of really looking at some of these issues related to water, what you need to do in terms of your future interventions is that you also need to have a network-based approach in terms of responding to these challenges, because these actors there, the mafia actors there, are amorphous actors. And I don't think so. Any rule-based mechanism would really help us in terms of addressing this issue. But I think we need to really look at our own water management practices, even our water diplomacy practices, and therefore have a more networked understanding of how we should, in fact, look at policies. So this is what I have to say. Yes, definitely, it's going to be one of the very pertinent issues in future. But then, definitely, because it's a complex problem, water is a complex problem. We need complex solutions to it. Any simplistic solution, I think, won't really help in terms of looking at or addressing these issues in the long term. Definitely.
Ms. Christensen-Rai, what challenges do you see coming up for transboundary water governance in the European Union? I think you're still muted.
Could you kindly repeat the question? Sorry.
So this is actually more of a general question. What kind of challenges you think might be coming up in the future for the European Union in terms of water governance? Of course, I had already in mind that global warming could be one of those challenges, but please let us know if this is the case, or if you see other aspects that could make water cooperation more difficult in the European Union in the future.
I think actually what just come to my mind when you asked this the question, and there's two things, and there is also a comment which which is mentioning suggesting that we could look into what is called here. I can see water memories. I just wanted to highlight this comment because I think this is an interesting. It's an interesting thought, and so the comment says that investing in water memories, giving the instances from the Himalayan towns and places, resulting in strange phenomena of flooding, clogging of drains, and landslide. But I think the idea of the water memories, I think that's, I mean, also in the context of what we talked about a little bit a while ago about reconnect to knowledge, maybe of the step wells or other knowledge which we could take up and I mean, do not forget it, but actually still use it and take it into consideration when we talk about water. And a second thing, when you asked this question, actually I thought more about an Indian city, and maybe because it is my work is also to work on the urbanization and the particular the context of cities and the role of cities. It is both regard to the planning of the cities. It can be adapting to climate change in the cities. It can also be in the water sector. So maybe that's where I would maybe go. And there was two things you mentioned, that increase of maybe pollution of water or scarcity of water. I would still like to add, which maybe I mentioned previously, is the implementation of plans, implementation and maintenance of infrastructure is really important aspects when you look at the water sector. In order to work with the water in a sustainable way, in order to minimize water which is lost, you can say. So I think it has to be, it's very important to have a holistic perspective when one looks also towards the future or looks ahead. So any aspect of the water, it must be with a holistic mind, and a holistic planning And you may also come look at the, I don't know, if you look at water, and there's also a cost of distributing water. It's a cost of cleaning the water.
Absolutely.
At a sewage treatment plant. There's a cost of bringing it back to the household. There's a cost of installing the infrastructure. So all these aspects, I would think, is if we want to look ahead, it's really good to bring those together in a holistic manner. And one thing maybe we not talk so much about yet, but that is actually, in order to take a decision or to plan, whether it's the water sector or any other sector, one needs to have some information or some data available. And that's I mean, data available, how much water is here, what is the content of it, what is the quality of it, and so on. So that goes into the holistic planning. So I rather like to look at it in that point of view. Thank you.
I would like to ask you one more follow-up question on this, and since we're out of time here, or almost out of time, I would like this to be your final statement. But now this is actually quite important because it hints at several things you just mentioned. Infrastructure needs to be available. We need to do surveys or data research. And urban water management. So the WWF had just released a study in which it says that by 2050, more than or the 30 cities of India that they have surveyed, they're more from South Asia, but I'm just talking about the Indian cities now. 30 cities would face extremely high water risk. And I wanted to know from you, is there actually any way this can still be prevented? You just mentioned infrastructure. Is it at all possible that an ambitious plan, just like the Jal Jeevan mission in India, which is aiming to bring water to every single tap, every single household in India, can actually be implemented when at the same time these cities, and they're still growing, these growing Indian cities are faced with running completely out of water?
I think that it's really important to look at the work of the ministries and the missions. They have the visions, and I also mentioned the smart city mission in the beginning. So I mean the approach and the focus which is put in from the government of India side is really important, and so that is important to take that. Remember, this is a lot of work going on in this field, and I mean I will still think that the holistic planning, who takes in the infrastructure, the environment part, the planning part, the bringing the right institutions together or stakeholders together. I mean, there's a various dimensions to working on topics of water and water in the city context. So I would say the holistic approach is really important.
Good. Now, Professor Bish, I would like to give you the opportunity to also comment on this, and then I would have one more question that I just have to ask you. But for now, please, your comments on the same, on the challenges of the future for South Asian water governance. I cannot hear you. Are you muted?
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Yes, I mean, when you really look at future of water in South Asia. I mean, I totally would agree with that. I mean, there is no disagreement that we would need a very holistic, integrated approach in terms of really looking at water management. And I think what COVID-19 has told us is that our lives are interconnected, they are interdependent. And if we don't really take a lesson from this, I think, not us so much, but our future generations will witness it. One of maybe, when I look into the future and if I really see hope, I think the ownership really, needs to come from the people themselves. And it is there that I think even the way we manage water, because one of the main problems when it really comes to India and even South Asia, is primarily related to implementation. So I think, there is some internalization which one really needs to do, some structural reforms, behavioral reforms which one needs to do. Because I think, some of the water policies which are really coming up, the water reforms which are really coming up, they have been progressive. But at the same time, I do see that element of sectoral, nature in them, the sectoral prism in them. And I think I would totally go by what Mr. Christinen said, in terms of really looking at water in holistic terms. And that I think becomes really essential. It's not really protecting that river stretch, it's also really looking at the springs up there in the mountains. Because if you go up to the northern Himalayas, if you go to northern India, some of these rivers are actually snow-fed rivers. And it is springs which actually are the source of perennial supply of water. And what is really happening in the springs are sort of depleting. Why? Because of deforestation taking place there, because of urbanization, the way urbanization, is being planned. So I would say that, one really needs in that context, when one is really thinking about water, to think in holistic terms, integrated terms. And in fact, my suggestion or my submission is that unfortunately in South Asia, we tend to be obsessed with the major river systems, that is the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Indus. And there is where our water diplomacy ends, and there is where it's done. So I would say, because this is a riverine South Asia, it's actually, South Asia is a space of rivers, and there are many minor rivers in South Asia which also need our attention. And I think, and then again, I'm going back to my own original point of a networked approach to water governance and water diplomacy, which becomes very important in case you really want to think about, saving lives in future. And which, of course, includes all these multiple issues that Ms. Kristen talked about. Not only water quantity but water quality, which in fact is a big, big challenge emerging in South Asia.
Great. I think this was actually already a perfect final statement. But I announced that I had one more question to you, and my apologies, because it's a huge question. But I will try my best to make it very simple, so as to enable you to give a brief answer, if that is at all possible. Professor Bish, India and China, do you think that water diplomacy could be a source for an increased conflict between India and China, or it could actually be a way of bringing those countries closer together in the future?
Yeah. So again, I would because you've suggested that we be short. When I look at the issue of Brahmaputra, I don't feel it's really a water issue between India and China. And the reason I'm saying so, it's really a leverage point with China, is really trying to pressurize India a bit, because if something happens, say in the South China Sea, then China can really pull in the rivers there up, in the northern boundaries. But yes, there are two ways to go, and definitely, if you look at the present state of India-China relations, conflict definitely is escalating. And I would say that water can be, I wouldn't use the word diplomacy, but water definitely can be a point of conflict between two countries. But on the other hand, and I've in fact written about this, is that, if you start framing it, within the larger parameters of sustainable development, I think perhaps they could be a way out. And in fact, interestingly, if you look at China's negotiating behavior with some of the other countries in Central Asia and the way it's mitigated highlighted some of these issues, is that it's very, very issue specific. So like it will talk just about water quality, and that sort of facilitates cooperation. And second, one interesting thing which I really liked, I think this was an agreement between China and Russia, that the departure point of conversation became the Convention on Biological Diversity. And therefore, when we are talking about water diplomacy in South Asia, I think one needs to go beyond water. You start with water, and there the trap lies, for defection to happen, or for conflicts to emerge. But I think, given that water is not just the water which is flowing in the river, but it's the entire ecosystem. They can be different ways. And I think strategizing around sustainable development goals could be one of the ways, because I think China has done a good deal when it really comes to its own internal water governance issues. And definitely, this could be a talking point to begin with. Yeah,
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just briefly summarize before I hand over back to Sabyasachi. So water diplomacy, transboundary water governance, both in the European Union and South Asia face different challenges, but there has already been learning from each other, mostly through the EU-India Water Partnership. There even has been a democratic payoff. And we have seen that in the European Union, water agreements, water sharing agreements, or water itself can bring countries together, and thus can bring also sustainability to an entire region. In order for this to happen in India, we would require, and to make sure that we are not facing an increased water crisis, we are needing a holistic approach. Where I believe that India has done already one step by forming one ministry just for water, something that I do not believe we have in the European Union yet. But in the future, there will always be the need for a dialogue and for understanding for the countries to come together, regardless of whether water is a divisive or a combining factor. This is all from my side. I would like to hand back to Sabyasachi now.
Thank you, Volker. And in interest of time, we've already overshot our stipulated time. So I'll not add anything more, but to underline, I think what has very, very clearly come out of this conversation is that the top-down initiatives, the diplomatic initiatives, the government-led initiatives in both regions, I think, need to trickle down to fertilize bottom-up organic movement, whether in all sectors. Education of the public, connecting stakeholders. And towards that end, I think this conversation has facilitated, and at least some thoughts on that. And I'm sure it's going to be watched on our channels, not just now, the viewers present, but also in future. And that the work we're doing with the Hans Seidel Foundation, Safeguard on Water Federalism, we're going to release a book coming up, or the work that we did, we had a conversation with Dr. Bish on hydro diplomacy. We would look forward to having more such sharings with you and the EU, based here in India, the EU delegation in India, Ms. Rai. We look forward to that. How can we trickle down more ideas to fertilize the ground on the projects that can come up bottom up, to make this happen? So on that note, I really have the great honor and pleasure of thanking you both to take time off and come on this conversation. We look forward from Asian Confluence to work together with you on that, and I join my friend and colleague at Hans Seidel Foundation to underline the fact that we are together working on this subject. and we want to take things forward. Thanks a lot for the collaboration with Hans Seidel Foundation on this, and we look forward to taking this narrative building approach forward. On that note, thank you again from the Asian Conference and the Hans Seidel Foundation, and to all our viewers who are watching, who's been with us, given your questions, and all those viewers who will join us in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.